things that you need to keep an eye on. That's it in a nutshell. It is quite a lengthy document, and it is still going through audit, so it is actually getting a little bit longer. They're quite keen on seeing a fair amount of detail in the infrastructure strategy. We try to keep it simple, but there are just some things that need to be covered to meet their expectations. Yeah.
All good. I am going to open the floor. If there are any questions, obviously it's a massive document with lots of assumptions because you're thinking 30 years out, you're thinking what something might cost or what priorities are. So I'm going to open the floor to councillors if you've got any questions, and just stating to councillors, this again is something that we adopt to consult on. So what we are saying is if we adopt this today with amendments, people might want to make, if there's a majority support or people feel that we need to move some stuff, but I know people will have some input, so I'm just going to open the floor and leave it up to the clever councillors. Councillor Gregory.
Thank you. I thought this was a really well-written document. It was really easy to read and it was interesting. And yeah, I didn't have any issues with it. I just wanted to say that.
Thank you. Councillor Seymour, just use microphones.
Thank you very much. Well, it is a good document. I've got a couple of questions about it. When I started reading it, I was really surprised on page 8 of the agenda, but it's item under 12. It doesn't really highlight anything around the development infrastructure that's important for housing. So we have a range of bullet points there. And I mean, I know it isn't the document, but it's the information to us. And once I got further through into the document, because I think of how many times we have had people in here asking council to do better about the preparation for growth and being able to deliver more housing. So on page 48, I thought we might have had something to say about Wainui Okatu reticulation of water and wastewater. So there's a bit of comment in there around Tarahere's growth project, and somewhere in the document I vaguely remember seeing it mentioned. But so this is all around key infrastructure issue 5, growth, providing infrastructure that supports housing development. And I do think we should get Okatu Wainui into this plan more specifically. And then on page, so I've got a few questions, and that's sort of covered later. On page 51, we talk about a new bridge, Nelson Road to the main road at Markraka, and some millions beside it. I wondered, is there a paper designation for that area, or is that going to require land to be purchased and houses to be removed? Is it, because sometimes in our district plan we have paper roads.
I don't know the detail on the paper road. I would need to check and come back to you. I know that project is in the draft regional land transport plan, and that's reflected here too. But I don't know the detail of the works required.
Have a huge impact on the availability of the land and the access to it. And on page 63, and others will make comments about it, we've talked on page 57 and onwards, where we do actually refer to infrastructure for housing growth. I just think that I'd like to see us move, and others will make, comment on that. In the middle of 63, additional development infrastructure needed to support residential growth, but we're not doing anything about it till 2024. Now, we've had numerous requests in here to do something about that sooner. So I would be wanting to see us move that further earlier. And it does talk about tens of millions. And I mean, obviously we can't expect everything to be costed. And then a review of the water and sanitary services in year 7. I think that's a bit far out. It talks there about water and wastewater services to be provided to Wainui and Markraka in year 27, 28. Well, I'd like to see us move that to something like 25, 26.
Which was the last one you spoke about?
On the same page, Madam Chair, 63 under the additional development box, which I think should be about 22, 23 if it not 24. And then the next box down is review water and sanitary services. And I think that's too far out. I think that should be 25, 26 at max. And I probably have, I think there's an absence of anything much relative to the coast, which Councillor Burdett will probably comment on too. On page 87, we talk about coastal protection assets right at the top of the page. And most of our coastal assets are at Wainui Beach. Well, I've just picked up one out of my ward, and I'd like to suggest that Waimar Road at Tokomara Bay is an asset, and that would run, that needs protection because it provides access to the homes of dozens and dozens of people. So that does seem to be a miss out of the document. Waimar Road, Tokomara Bay, on page 73, please.
Who's going to comment or?
Yeah, there are lots and lots in there. So the plan in terms of the housing supply and the infrastructure needed to support housing supply, I'll start with that topic. So you're right, there's not a specific bullet point in the overview, and that would be something that we could add because that does reflect what's in both the LTP and the infrastructure strategy. So happy to do that if there's general agreement. So the plan is, obviously there's the focus on the Taruhiru block in the short term and the projects set out there. But there does need to be some additional work done by both the infrastructure teams and the strategic planning teams to figure out where this increased housing supply is going to go and the infrastructure needed. The intention was to tie that into the next LTP, hence the 2024 date, in terms of new projects needed that go far beyond what's included in the capital expenditure budgets that you've already approved those drafts. Of course, there is the potential to revisit that as part of an annual plan or an LTP variation if a project emerges between 2021 and 2024 that you really need and want to progress urgently as a council and after hearing from your community. In terms of the timing of, I think it's the Wainui reticulation, that was after talking with the asset managers, and because of the uncertainty around the Three Waters reform at the moment, they didn't want to be leaping into sort of a review of reticulation out to Wainui and other areas until both the infrastructure planning and RMA planning had been done for housing supply and development, and there was more certainty about the Three Waters reform. So that's how that sequence of timing works.
I don't think something in 25, 26 with respect, and I know it's not your words, is leaping into it. I still think that is quite a way out. In light of the fact that it has been raised before, we know that there are wastewater issues around the Murphy Road end in winter because of the high water table, and we just tend to turn a blind eye, and we should be taking a stronger environmental protection focus, I believe, and I hear all those things because we discussed that other paper this morning. I did have one other thing that seemed quite important, Mark. So can you talk to me about, sorry, just tell me about why Tokomara Bay, please, and why that's not seen as a coastal asset.
The coastal assets referred to in that particular section are other coast erosion protection assets you already have in place, which are primarily at Wainui Beach, rather than all the assets you might have in the coastal environment.
But this is an infrastructure plan for the next 30 years.
Yes.
Wouldn't we want to put those areas that are vulnerable into the infrastructure plan if we're talking about 30 years out?
But at the moment, looking from your capital expenditure budgets, you haven't approved in those draft estimates anything for expanding your current coastal protection network or adding new coastal protection schemes, which is what that particular section is talking about.
Okay, I hear what you're saying. We have to spend money there, but
there may be some budgets within the roading resilience.
I'm sorry, I'm just trying to find my third one. Forget it for now.
Councillor Foster.
Page 51 talks about the Taruhiru block and investment in the future. That's an obvious area of expansion for future housing, future infrastructure. But my question is, what are the current boundaries for the so-called Taruhiru block? What other boundaries at the moment?
They are as set out in the current Tairaki Resource Management Plan, and I think it's Cameron Road, Nelson Road,
Hanson
from
Road.
memory.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The whole area.
So they haven't, there's been no changes made to those boundaries.
Right, okay, now because there has been some changes in subdivision requirements in Hanson Road. It used to be everything on the left-hand, the town side of Hanson Road, but there's been subdivisions happening on the other side where some landowners are querying where does this all come from, because it was supposed to be a no-go zone for subdivision.
Yeah. I believe they went through a resource consent process, but yeah.
I have Councillor Sandra, did you put your hand up? Yes. Faulkner, Dowsing, Robinson. Microphone.
The third bullet point, the identification of a third water source. I would like to think that in 30 years, given the need for water security in this region, across the rest of the country also, of course, but in this region in particular, that should read the advanced planning and securing of a third water source.
What page is that?
Page 9.
9.
Page 9, number 22.
Oh, yes.
And then again on page 26, let me just go there. Water supply safety, implementing the water safety plans, et cetera, developed in 2017. I don't see anything in there that tells me that water security is going to be addressed in the next 30 years. So I'd like to see that worded in a much more proactive fashion.
Yep.
If
That,
we could,
yep,
please.
I
So
can amend.
planning, implementing and securing a third water source. Sorry.
I have Councillor Dowsing next, thank you, and then Councillor Robinson.
Thank you. My takeout from this was slightly different to Councillor Gregory's. I thought that the document contains all of the information necessary, but it is it's very wordy and not a document that leads you to understand things on a project by project basis, or in terms of a single point of reference for information about a topic. And I'll use the one that's come up over and over, and that's the Taruheru block. Taruheru block's referenced 20 times in the document across 16 different pages. The first time it's referenced is on page 7, and the last time it's referenced is page 162. Somewhere in the middle of there, you find out what the outcome is going to be, which is enabling 400 to 800 houses. But before all of that, before we understand the outcome, we've already talked about the cost of $18 million that, and there could be a shortfall against that cost. So for the understanding of the reader, we need to bring all of that information together in a location that makes sense about why we're doing it, how we're doing it, and when we're doing it. Because at the moment, you find those all in different parts of the document. And that's not solely for Taruheru block, but it's the format it works for someone who has the background of all of these projects. It works for someone who's inside council and we understand them, but from anybody outside trying to read this, it takes some searching. Like I raised before, and it's in a previous meeting, when we're talking about that 18 million, potentially more, as indicated by the document, for those 600 to 800 houses, we're currently taking that fund from all contributions in region, whereas realistically, if we're able to leverage 400 to 800 houses, let's say on average 600, it means a development contribution of 30,000-ish each section to deliver that one project, to generate that 18 million. So I'd like to see that we start to rationalise where we take our development contributions from and assign them to the right place. And that's more a financial strategy element, not too much for this, but the direct correlation of need, delivery, and time frame in our LTP is all related to our ability to finance that. And so I think it's worth worth highlighting how we pay for that in that same context. And then deeper into it, I think we're missing elements, even in that, again, in that section. Now that's 400 to 600, 400 to 800 houses we've mentioned, but where is the commentary on the few hundred houses on Wainui Road that can go in the subdivision there? Where's the potential for Wainui? Where's the potential for additional in Sponge Bay? Where's the, it focuses on one block in one point of time without looking at the broader region. We've discussed so many times the rezoning of Awapuni Road, the fact that it doesn't need to be rezoned to be converted to residential, but there's no commentary in there about the cost to make Awapuni Road suitable for residential, and it may be much less than 18 million. But so I find myself looking through this document and thinking, why don't I have a section that's specifically on growth, specifically project-based, and specifically on the challenges and the outcomes we want to achieve? Why do I need to read across 160 pages to find that?
Yeah.
And so I like the document. Don't get me wrong. I like the content. I think the information is in there. I just think that legibility for an external could be brought together in a more concise fashion.
And the consultation document is really your chance to do that, to bring together those key messages in a sort of concise storytelling way, relying on the content in the infrastructure strategy, but then pulling out the real key messages.
Thank you for that. Next on my list was Councillor Robinson. Thank you, Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The only real concern I have in this paper, I've got multiple notations on it, and I'll start at the end and work backwards. Page 120 says, in terms of demand management in relation to water, domestic water usage, we have assumed that water residential metering will be rolled out over the next 10 years to enable better monitoring, management and understanding.
Page 121.
120 of 227. That water metering will be rolled out over the next 10 years to enable better monitoring, management and understanding of residential water use. And my note here says big assumption, because certainly in my time in council, we have never, that I can recall, made a decision categorically to introduce water metering. And throughout this document, it has by stealth become something which is going to happen. We've agreed to water metering since I've been on. Oh, yeah, okay, but we've never discussed and debated the actual merits of it. And
we have.
Where was I?
You didn't attend.
Oh, shush.
Yeah.
Well, all right, fine. I will carry on with my foot in my mouth. So when I look through the rationale for the water metering, and it seems to be about water usage, and we can all agree that for 2 months of the year, to set January and February, when commercial demand outstrips domestic demand, we have to have water monitoring and water shortage measures in place. But the rest of the year, we have enough water. The report says we've got 38 million litres of storage on the reservoirs around town. We've got peak demand of 30 million. We've got plenty of waters in the dams. It's just the pipe work getting it on a 24-hour daily basis to town, which is the problem. I don't see the benefit in spending $2.7 million installing water meters, which is what this plan suggests we will do in years 4 to 7 of the LTP, on installing water meters when our problem is in fact getting water from the dams to town. I have a real issue with that. And then for only 2 months of the year, we have a shortage. And
thank you, Mr. Wilson. Do you
I
want to
know I'm
comment?
talking here, Madam Chair. And our community responds really well when we have those shortages. We don't run out of water. Our community is very good at responding when we have notices go up about water demand in January and February. We always have responded well. So I just think it's really unpalatable for our community to say, we are going to spend 2.7 million, then we're going to spend goodness knows what in OPREX. Monitoring that, reading those meters, paying people to drive around and read them, chase up bad debts because people don't pay for it. Just think it's a nightmare.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Can you please comment?
Through your worship, the water metering is one of the tools that we need to implement to help manage our water in our region. We are short of water more than 2 months of the year, so we have issues around our storage up at Wainaki. The most compelling reason why we need to do it is because under the freshwater plan, we have our water consent to take water out of the Te Arai, which is what we're taking it from when we take it out of Wainaki. As part of our consent, we need to show good water management, and we also have to show for our demand management strategy. The most effective tool that there is to install meters so that we can monitor usage, but then also we can make sure that it alerts us to where there are high users and people can be charged for that in time. That actually the installation of water meters has a 30% reduction when they are installed once people realise that they've been taking more water than what they should have been when they start to see high usage of water. So that's been seen across the country.
Yeah.
If I've got a water meter and I'm going to pay for water, then I will expect to use it irrespective of whether there's restrictions or not, because I'm paying for it. On the same basis that when petrol hit $1 a litre, we went, oh, but then we know, well, it's $1 a litre. I'm going to pay for it. I may as well pay for it. The problem is we actually can't supply enough water for at least 2 months of the year. It's a temporary situation which only occurs a small portion of the year. Well, Mr. Wilson, it does appear that the notices go up maybe December if we're really unfortunate, but it's January and February. You told us the other day the dams are 90% full, but we've got a dam which is 50% not in capacity because of slumping. We've got 5% extra capacity. We did the work on restoration up at Wainaki to add at that end. We've got 38 million litres of capacity of reservoirs in town, which just can't top up fast enough when we peak out at 30 million litres a day usage. And the average is 25 million litres a day. We're sweet. So it's not a permanent problem, and there's a lot of capacity in the system. I'm paying for it. Okay, I'm sorry.
Oh, excuse me, sir.
I will use it, and that's the
Okay, that's
rationale that
enough.
people. Sorry, my apologies. That's the rationale people will use.
Yep.
That's the
Okay, thank
rationale
you.
people will use.
Thank you. You've made your point. Any other councillors want to discuss that issue? Councillor Burdett.
Going out 30 years, protecting what we need there and getting there in terms of our aging infrastructure. To me, two key things stand out. And few of you addressed. The first one is water. I've always been on about the city needing more stores. David just alluded to only 2 months of the year we have a shortage problem. Well, the last time, I don't need to remind you all, the last time we had a break in the pipe, we were down for 4 days. So for me, storage. The second one, in terms of, this is, as I said, the infrastructure strategy. In terms of, I suppose, the necessities of the district is road. And there's a couple of statements in here and in the paper this morning where some of those roads we may not be able to continue to maintain. I have a different view. In going out 30 years, we need to put the investment in to ensure all those roads, including our back roads, give access to our rural people, have to be maintained. That's just my lot on this take, because water, the city, roading for the district.
Thank you for that. Councillor Akwata-Brown, I saw your hand. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ms Noble. Thank you so much for all the work that is always put into these plans. And often when I'm reading them, I'm trying to figure out, as a governor in this space, you know, I get a lot of information, a lot of succinct dialogue that I've read. I just went back to the previous 10-year plan, you know, looking at the synergy and the ongoing conversation. And on this wonderful tool we have, Docs on Tap, that often isn't seen as wonderful. You can type in, obviously for a page reference to a topic. So I, being me, decided I'd quite like to see where the term equity may have come up, if you like, so overarching this report, and it comes up 3 times. So then I thought, oh, we're keen to see what gets me as an individual. So Kaiti featured 4 times in the report regarding drainage, mostly water framework. Algon twice, young people twice, water 449 times, and climate change 223. So when I look at this, I'm trying to figure out, are we getting better? When we look at our previous iterations of plans and debates around infrastructure needs, because we're trying to be really good at forecasting forward the population change, the needs of our community, all of those things. And I wondered, for you writing and being involved with a team writing this, are you seeing, I guess, like with everything frustrating about council, it's mandated to do these things. It's a job we have to do. But when you're doing it, are you seeing more resources coming your way to help support what you're trying to, put forward? Are we seeing that, an understanding of the region's changing needs, et cetera, and the external inputs that happen when we try and do this as a council? So overall, is this plan giving us a past into a future? Because it's aspirational, it's hopeful. I believe it is. The intent is good, but I always want to know how well is it going to be received in the console.
It's definitely founded on where you came from in terms of your last LTP and infrastructure strategy. And it also incorporates, I suppose, as a planner, I'd have to say it incorporates that future thinking and planning for that future thinking. And that's your TRMP, Tairāwhiti Resource Management Plan project, and the detailed infrastructure planning that will be done over the next 1 to 3 years to really support that, plus your climate change adaptation and mitigation. So it's got that forward thinking as well. So when you come back and you're here in 3 years' time, and then again in 6 years' time, I think you will have a wealth more information to make your decisions on, and make decisions on your capital expenditure going forward.
Because obviously for me, when I sat around this table my first year, I really wanted to see deprivation numbers go down. Like respectively, we have in our neighbourhoods 10s, and it quite frankly breaks my heart a little, because we shouldn't in this space. I know we do, but I would like to see an aspirational hope to see parts of our region not be noted constantly as deprivation 10 neighbourhoods. I know that's for a lot of things that are external too, but we have a role. I'd like to see how well we are kind of collecting data around, the parks, reserve spaces of wellness and goodness, all those factors out there to see. We need those good news stories too of what we have achieved to date. We are looking at huge reform changes around the RMA, lots of debates happening in that space, and water, gold, and our push forward for water metering, its impact on our communities. So, in our forecasting, really negating the space of income levels, we know that they haven't changed for a lot of our population. So when we're talking rates, when we're talking housing issues, etc., and I guess in some ways we're talking of lobbying constantly to get that help and support we need for our region. We get our fair share. So overall, I appreciate the work that's done into this. I always do, because you guys do have a lot to cover off. But understanding it and reading it, I think I need another week. Always respectively, because it is a thorough document, and I just hope that as governors, we are here to ensure that it covers off what we're called the task to do. So I just would like to see an equity lens as well across it, and certainly continue to read. Sure.
Thank you. Any other councillors? Councillor Hughes.
I always wait till last because Shannon usually asks my questions for me. I'm on page 84 of the report and 98 of the agenda. Second paragraph down below the bold section. We own and manage over 1,190 hectares of open space. This is a significant portfolio given the size of our population, and our ability to maintain all current assets is limited. So it kind of hints at, but like we're a bit oversubscribed in the park space and very undersubscribed in the housing space. So I don't know if there's any kind of strategy in that area, or whether that would fit inside this document.
So obviously, as you'll know, no decisions have been made and nothing's come to the council about that. But it is, as you'll see in the recreation and amenity space, one of the options they'll be looking at over the next 3 years is how is all the reserve space used? Can some of it be reutilized, streamlined, change delivery of services? And obviously, as part of that wider Tairāwhiti Resource Management Plan process, it's looking at the use of land and whether there is the potential for some rezoning, changing Reserve Act status. There are quite a few hurdles to jump before you do that.
Yeah, well, very unselfishly, I have about 8 parks within 10 minutes of distance of myself. And as Meredith was alluding to earlier, I don't think Elgin has one. So yeah, there was just, I think there's a few opportunities there where there's some areas that are probably oversubscribed and where housing seems to be our biggest issue at the moment. So,
Thank you for that. Councillor Wharehinga.
Thank you, Your Worship. It's councilman. I do want to support, I guess, the general, first before I get to my point, I do want to support the general cordial from Councillor Hughes in regards to all of our open space we've had. There are a lot of conversations kind of happening around and then with between us from the hapu-iwi space around whenua Māori or whenua that they have mana whenua over, etc., etc. And I find that those kind of conversations are probably also an additional solution in regards to us maybe helping devolve or shift some of those resources or some of those things that we have under our brief. So I think that'll be a great point for us to engage in regards to our infrastructure strategy with iwi and hapu. My actual point that I'm standing in regards to points that are made, and I won't get everyone to read them, but they're made on page 103 and page 111. It's in regards to forestry's impact on our roads and our infrastructure, and how the document is currently worded is it'll say, you know, currently the commercial and industrial needs are being met, and in brackets, however, heavy vehicles, forestry are smashing up our roads for, you know, it's not verbatim like that in there, but I'm just kind of summarising. And we all agree that that's the state of play. I do think that that is one of those things that kind of Councillor Dowsing had alluded to in regards to the clear messaging, because if you were to be, I guess, a layperson that got a hold of this document and kind of scanned your eye over it, you'd go, oh, okay, it looks like industrial use of our roads is being met, when in fact that isn't completely the case. I think that's definitely something that needs to be also included in the documentation that's going out to the public, because we've often received feedback where we go, hey, this thing wasn't in, this thing that now is a problem wasn't in that document, and we go, yeah, it is, and it's actually, you have to find 2 little examples of it inside of 100 and something page document. So I did want to stand and speak to that, because I think that's one of those things that, again, is very small inside the document, but is very huge in terms of impact for our region. Thank you very much, Your Worship.
Thank you. Councillor Sheldrake and then Councillor Warsnop.
Yeah, thank you. I found it a really interesting read, and sort of first time up, newbie, and awful lot to take in, I suppose, prioritising what should come first and not come later. But it spooks me a bit when we ask Andrew Gaddam this morning how many truck movements to the port. We get told 1,800 in and 1,800 out. Could be the thing, at 1,800 in and out. You know, what is going to happen to the roads, and how's this going to be all managed, and where does it sit within here? And so, yeah, like really interesting read. I didn't sort of go diving to look at one topic or one other thing, but I suppose what goes out to consultation will be really important ultimately. And when is that? When will it go?
So you will see the consultation document, I think it's in March, and then consultation is March, April. Yeah.
24th of March till 21st April.
And how long is it out for?
A month.
For a month. Thank you.
Councillor Warsnop.
Okay, give me a second. All right, so my first point was on page 29, and I just wanted to support what Councillor Faulkner was saying in terms of, you know, 30 years is a long time. I would have thought we would have done, you know, the Makoti you would hope is going to get dealt with in the next 5 years. There's another 25 after that. You know, we've talked about pulling together some work to look at our water storage options. You would hope that something would have come out of that. I think we need to be a little bit more firm in the fact that will have not only planned something, but we will have delivered something. And we need to send that message really clearly, because if the government don't think we plan to do anything, then it's likely they won't have us on their list of potential people who might want to use their money for such things. Also, just below that, where it talks about the road use and infrastructure strategy, low volume sealed roads will revert to unsealed. I just think somewhere in there we need to talk about encouraging the sustainable use of our network, so that we are not only, we've talked about encouraging, using different mechanisms to shape how our roads are used and when, so that we're not ending up with this massive damage that we then have as emergency works. And just on that, if you sort of fast forward all the way through to page 123, growth and demand. So we're looking at this great big surge in forestry harvests, while page 29 says we are managing a decline in the roading asset. They don't really go together. You're going to have big issues and a massive blowout at the end of the strategy. And that just brings me to my last point, I think, on this paper, which is 30-year infrastructure strategy takes us to 2050, which is Tairāwhiti 2050, which is our spatial plan. How well aligned, this doesn't seem anywhere near as aspirational as what the spatial plan is. To what extent does that matter? And when does it start aligning?
Yeah, so obviously the community outcomes, you've adopted those from Tairāwhiti 2050, and they're in the LTP and also have been reflected throughout the infrastructure strategy. Because the strategy by law has to contain your 30-year forecast capital and operational expenditure, you can't be as aspirational as maybe you would like to be, because you have to put, numbers in a budget. But every 3 years, when you come back and revisit, that's when you're making the changes and maybe moving more strongly towards a particular outcome or all the outcomes. Yeah.
Just wanted to support Shannon a little bit too. I found it, Debbie's obviously just way brighter than me, or it was really late at night, because I found it quite hard going as well. It sort of read more like a novel, and I found it difficult to pull out like the just logical, concise, this is what I'm trying to tell you, and this is, I'm not, yeah, we clearly fall on different sides of the spectrum there a little bit.
Okay. Wow, I've got a few comments to make if everyone has had their turn. So I just wanted to reiterate what Joe just said. We need to remember, even though this is our 30-year strategy, we get a bite at it every 3 years. So we do look out a long way ahead, and we do need to put dollars next to it. But as situations change and certain government legislation become more clear, we then do have that opportunity to revisit. So I found this document very information dense. There's a lot in here. Everything is in there. And I agree with what Shannon and Kerry said. There's 10 different areas throughout the document, a notice of 10 different say the same project mentioned 10 different times, but the big issue for me is everything is in here. I'll mention one thing that I would like to add, but now it's up to us to take this a clear message to the community so that they can see their vision and their strategy behind it. One thing I want our council to be is a climate change champion, and how do we become that? And this is what heartened me. Everywhere throughout this document, there was mention and action or a part of the strategy to address how we're going to move forward in our climate change plan. So I do want to congratulate staff that they have put that lens, that climate change lens, over most of our decisions. Saying that, to me, when I think about climate change, I think about water. That's the most important thing to me, is water, and then obviously infrastructure. So water to me is, how do we make sure we use what we have, the little that we have, we use it as best as possible. We have a few tools in here to make sure what we have, we use it well. Next, and this is what the point I want to make, is about storage and how we transport the water that we have. One thing I want to push, and I know Ming pushed for it as well, but it didn't get legs. I do think we need to rethink it, is to encourage everyone in town to get a water tank. There is water falling from the sky every winter. We have more than enough. And I want us as a council to, in a certain way, incentivize or encourage our community to get a water tank per household, because that means in the summer, when you need to fill your swimming pool or your paddling pool, or you need to water your lawn, you can then use that. So I do want us to maybe think how we can incorporate that in our thinking, because I think that is very important to use the little that we have and make more from what's available during those times when it rains a lot. And then last, for me to be a climate change champion council, CCCC, we need to look at our infrastructure, and this strategy have that thinking. How are we going to make sure our underground infrastructure, our roading infrastructure are fit for purpose, not just today, but in 30 years' time? So I do want to thank the staff. It is an information dense document, but I take honour in moving this document. And I think it's a lot of good work that's gone into this. We are taking this out to talk to our community and ask, what do you think of that? Do you think we need to change anything? I've got a seconder here and Councillor Bidek. Councillor Seymour, do you want to make a quick comment?
I just want to ask if we're going to take in from this changes, like my suggestion of the infrastructure coming a year forward. Are we wasting our time?
So Joe? Joe?
Something for you to discuss as a council. I'm not sure how that aligns with the draft operational and capex budgets you've got in the LGP would be my one concern.
I think so. In terms of the water program, Mr. Wilson would have presented at one point how we had intended to stage that activity. So when you start moving something forward, for example, Wainui reticulation, that has a flow-on impact to everything else that has been planned in that strategy. So on that particular one, I think you were looking at 27, 28. So that's the review of sanitary services coming forward to 25, 26.
What page?
60.
And we're talking about 24 and 23. And I mean, did Manaki Tairāwhiti waste their time coming to talk to us about, did Manaki Tairāwhiti waste their time coming to talk to us about the importance of being able to enable more development and more housing in the city? And we hear all the time about what a shortage of housing and accommodation there is. And I mean, all the limits we've heard all the time from the other side of the table are that, you know, we don't have the infrastructure in place. So is it okay in 2021 to say we're not going to do anything about it till 2024? And that's what I'm trying to promote, that we listen to what we've been told by wider than just our community, agencies and iwi that are part of wanting to see better housing facilities and opportunities, and try to bring that forward to 2023. 22, 23, I beg your pardon. Anyone?
So the 2024 will be in coincide with the next long-term plan. So you would have been making some decisions based on what we've got in front of us in order to inform those decisions, because at the moment we don't know where these houses are going to go. We don't have consents in. So the team needs to understand that before anything can be factored in and would be brought forward. So 2024 would be where you'd be making significant investment decisions for the infrastructure.
Frank, I appreciate what you're saying, but I just think that that is a bit of a cop-out when we mention the Tarahera Dock several times. And it does say in the next box over principal options, various options for consideration to increase existing capacity, interceptor and upgrades, extend the current network, and funding of growth-related projects. Now, I mean, it's not like today is the first time it's ever been raised. It has been raised last year. And I mean, fine if the majority will is to ignore the messages that we've been given by the community, which I think is what we're trying to say. It's all too hard, so we're not going to do it. And yet we want more housing in the district, and there's an emergency, and we need accommodation. We need workers' accommodation, which won't require quite the resources that housing requires. And we sent the showgrounds people away telling them we didn't have enough infrastructure for them to put in accommodation for RSE workers. So are we actually prepared to address the needs of this community or not?
So if I may, through the chair, I don't think it's fair to lay everything on council's shoulders in terms of what's required for housing development. What we haven't got is a clear plan of where the houses are going. What we are doing is we're working with Manaaki and the developers in the housing steering group to make sure that we can support that. But we don't know what it's going to cost, and we can't irresponsibly put a figure in here around the scale of capital costs and say $10 million we're going to spend in year 3 of the long-term plan, which is what the which is what this particular area that you're referring to will give us that number that flows through the LTP. $10 million is a significant impact on your budget, and you haven't even engaged with the community on that and what it's going to cost or what we're going to pay for. So we are working alongside to see what we can do by way of infrastructure provision, but we don't know how much it's going to cost. Now, I might add, if Mr. Wilson wants to add anything there.
There's 18 million alluded to.
That's in relation to the Taraheru block.
And that's what I'm talking about.
Because that work has been done and those projects have been costed.
Yeah.
Because
So
that work began a long time ago with the structure plan that's in your Tairāwhiti resource management plan.
So through the chair, the other reason for the Taraheru block is because we have lead developers who are developing that land. We have a number of people who talk to us about very long, far away developments that they are wanting to do. We don't have lead developers that are pushing our capacity in anywhere else across the district. So Taraheru is the part where we have lead developers who are looking to unlock large amounts of sections at the moment, and we're working with them. For other areas, people will talk to us, but nobody is committing to do any infrastructure. And there is nothing in our infrastructure at the moment where we're seeing 100 or 200 houses being proposed where we can't take them at the moment. So we don't have lead developers to work with.
And if I might also add, if this council wants to invest in growth and would like the activity managers to then look at the costs around increasing the network without having clarity around that, what that growth looks like, then ultimately the ratepayer will be paying for the growth in the future. And that goes against what you've already put in your financial strategy in terms of growth paying for growth. So there are a number of different things that we need to weigh up. We can't just go and put a figure of 10 million, for example, in there and start upgrading everything without certainty that that's going to happen.
Well, you won't be upgrading everything because we don't function like that. But we hear about development at Wainui can't be justified because the pipes won't carry. And that's just a small amount of development along Murphy Road. We get that as an excuse all the time that we can't allow more sections to be opened up. All I'm trying to get us to discuss is whether we've got a will to bring 2024 forward to 22-23. If we haven't, well, that's fine. That's clearly the position council's chosen to take.
Thank you for that. Councillor MAB.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I apologise, I meant to raise this because I hear you when you say we want to be leading in climate change. And twice I see climate change mitigation, implementing climate change adaptation plan on page 9, and then climate change mitigation plan is mentioned in the next paragraph down. So we currently have as a council a climate change plan per se, and I'm wanting to ask, have we as council measured ourselves in respect to climate change mitigation stuff? Because how do we keep on top of that if we're going to be leading it respectively?
So what the strategy sets out is that in 30 years' time, you will have a climate change, well, before that, but during the next 3 years, climate change planning risk assessment is going to occur. So you will have developed as a council a climate change adaptation and mitigation plan. The names may change along the way. And that in 30 years, you'll be well on your way to implementing both those plans. So they're not in place at the moment as a climate change adaptation plan and a climate change mitigation plan. But the LTP and the infrastructure strategy are saying there is a commitment to do that over the next 3 years.
Okay.
And then, you know, any decisions you have to make about capital investment will be made in the future on the basis of that work.
But that's within working now, in respect that we are cognizant of it, so we are doing what we can now. So
that's been a very strong theme through all the activity management planning that supports the long-term plan and the infrastructure strategy is that climate change adaptation and mitigation lens has been all the way through the thinking.
Okay, councillors, I think we've given this a good thrashing. Last question, councillor Dowsing.
Thank you. Sorry, this was just in support of Councillor Seymour, and it's the concept of a 30-year plan versus the concept of our immediate need, and the only emphasis outside of Taraheru is infill development. There's not a strategy in here for infill development. It's completely blank on that. So we don't know. Does Childers Road have enough? Does I mentioned the development on Wainui Road. It's preloading and obvious that that is there to be developed. Do we have enough for those 200 odd sections? And so, whilst we haven't got details in here pricing it, they should be included. We should understand whether we have capacity for infill or whether we need to increase infrastructure. And we should understand whether projects that are on the horizon that we may not be directly discussing with the lead developer, we'd still need to be proactive enough to identify them and put them in. And yes, I understand the requirements for prices against all of our committed projects, but it is a 30-year strategy, and we can't have an identification of 800 sections for 30 years, or maximum of 800 sections for 30 years. That's what we've got in here currently. It's just not enough foresight in this document around that need.
Thanks for that.
Just in terms of the assumptions made by with the 800 sections, so that was based on the information that what we contracted, which also assisted with development contributions. Is that so if it's their assumptions, and if the council feels that that's not the correct assumption and wants to see something flow through, then
so that number is specifically in the document that Taraheru opens up 400 to 800 sections depending on density. I'm not questioning whether that's right or wrong. I'm saying that if that's the only number we have in this document about urban growth, then at the 400 level, we only meet our current, actually we're under our current demand for housing. So our infrastructure strategy is failing housing development in its current form unless we take note and identify those other areas of potential development and include them in the strategy. We may not be able to include pricing, but it's a strategy, it is not a budget. Yeah, it's not a long-term plan, it's a strategy.
I'd hardly say it's failing, but we'd need to get some, the assumption around, well, what do we think that the growth would look like? And then we would bring that into there. Could we draw on anything else that we have?
Shh, can Joe just answer?
There has been work done on capacity, so we could integrate in terms of infill capacity what the network could provide in terms of wastewater. I know it's a strategy, but the auditors view it as a plan. They need to see the supporting information behind every number, every reference that gets put in the document. So if you do want to add potential future growth areas, you need to be able to provide as a council the supporting information to say why that's been identified, how it's been identified, and what's the technical basis for that. Hence the plan within the infrastructure strategy to take the next 3 years to really do that work properly.
So to summarise then my point, Manaki Tairāwhiti have a lot of this information and a lot of the growth projections, I would assume, and have identified several areas where there will be development, I would assume.
No, not yet.
Well, okay. Let's use the one example I keep putting forward, the Wainui Road area. There is a large development going on there that is excluded from this, and it has to be on our horizon. And that's, it's as significant as half of the Taraheru block, which is an $18 million spend. It's 200 odd sections, and so it should be included. I don't understand why it's not. And it could be included to the degree that there is 200, potentially 200 sections here, and the infrastructure is capable of carrying the wastewater and stormwater, and that's fine. But if it's not highlighted in urban development, then where is it? Because this is the only document we have.
Care to comment, Joe?
So Wainui Road, that's greenfield development you're talking about, not infill?
Shh.
Sorry, just
Can
to
you
clarify.
please listen to the answer?
So that's, I talked about having information on infill and wastewater capacity, not greenfield development. So I think it probably would need a conversation with the asset managers in terms of what's possible and what's not, and whether it's appropriate now to try and pick winners in your infrastructure strategy when you haven't done that more detailed planning and thinking.
When you talk about numbers and we need to justify it, is need not a number? Because we do have quite a lot of numbers around need and demand and what what the deficit is and what we want to try and address. And the second point was that LGNZ have talked recently about the ratepayer funding scheme, which would enable us to, instead of it being our own funds, it would allow developers to use funds essentially under our umbrella. We don't, do we actually need to have our own funds tagged in there? I don't, I'm not sure why it's, I
Still
agree.
needs to be in your budgets, you
But
know,
it's-
however it's funded, and it's
Yeah.
not currently in your budgets, those draft budgets that you approved.
What we do have is a pretty good understanding of what's needed and what needs addressing. And if it's not in our strategy, where is it? I agree with Shannon.
So it is in the strategy, but you haven't jumped to the answers in the strategy. You said we're going to do the planning over the next 3 years and talk to the community, look at the infrastructure needs, talk to the developers, talk to Manaki Tairāwhiti, talk to Kaina Ora, and then actually make decisions about the capital expenditure you need in a detailed way. It doesn't mean that nothing's happening just because you're making a significant capital expenditure decision as part of your next LTP. Just means you're not making that significant capital expenditure decision now.
Mr. Wilson.
So through the chair, we have got capacity and we understand Wainui Road. We can take another 1,200 houses potentially on Wainui Road along our interceptor there. A lot of it depends on when and where it comes in. The greenfield development that you're discussing also is subject to a plan change. So it's not as simple as a developer putting the houses on there. There's still a plan change process that needs to be undertaken in a hearing before that land can even become available for intensive housing that's been discussed. It's also stormwater issues that need to be resolved, and they can be resolved by a potential developer, but that will also hit their budgets as to whether or not they were wanting to then do that once they look at the cost implications for what they need to do. So there's a number of factors at play when it comes to looking at any of the greenfield sites that are there, and from our discussions with the developers as to versus whether or not it's worthwhile them doing them, given the housing affordability, the risk ratios and all of those things. So even though the land's identified doesn't mean that there's a developer that has an appetite for it. And as we said before, they're all in very different stages of whether or not those developments are able to go ahead.
Councillor Faulkner.
One small thing just around point number 8,
Microphone.
Given that we talk about the same thing 10 times across a very big document, I'm sure we could strip out an awful lot of that to have it become a lot more straightforward. So that would be my first thing. The one thing that I'm not hearing in any of this is about employee accommodation opportunities. And we keep hearing about housing, individual houses per se, but there's such demand out there. We heard from the port this morning, we're hearing from horticulture all the time and time again for, even on site and on private land. Those sort of things are not addressed in here at all. I just wonder if there's a place for that, or is that too new to the table, given that you started this in 2018 and some of us weren't here? That would be my question.
So we could touch on that in the growth and demand section. That's right at the end where it talks about what are the demand pressures coming on infrastructure. Could weave some of that aspect into there, so it's not just about housing, permanent housing supply.
Yeah, because we know it's a very clear need now. It's been requested of us now. And the other thing I did, just following on from your worship, your comment, I do wonder in that first table on page 7, whether climate change will impact our infrastructure is not actually a small heading, it is just a fact.
Thank you. Okay, I've got a recommendation on page 5. I moved it, second by councillor Badet. All in favour? Contrary? Carried. Okay, councillors, thank you, Joe. We've got 2 more documents to go through. So the next one we've seen a few times before, the activity summaries. So anyone, am I missing something? Did I miss a document? No. Page 127? Yep.
I'm happy to move it. My point.
Can we just first let them open the paper
Sure.
and then, but thank you, I've noted you're moving. Mr. Tim, how are you?
Very good.
Do you want to just, we've
Briefly.
seen this before, but
Sure.
you want to just set the scene and then we'll open the floor for councillors. Thank you.
Sure. Kia ora tātou, councillors. So this paper comes along with the draft activity summaries, which basically provide a highlight of, at a very high level, the work plans and priorities for each of council's activities over the next 10 years. Under the Local Government Act, these documents, the activity summaries, are required to be released as supporting documents to the consultation document that will be released to the public on March the 24th. It's quite a process-driven thing. They're not the sort of strategic work that comes in the front part of the long-term plan that sort of links it all together and is summarised in the consultation document. The requirements under the Local Government Act are for these summaries to include the rationale for the delivery of the activities, the links to the community outcomes, any significant negative effects, and then mention the levels of service, the performance measures, and the targets that each of the activities will be seeking to achieve. And it also aligns with the infrastructure strategy and the financial strategy that you're receiving today. And they're subject to any comments that you may have, and also audit, which are looking at all of these documents currently. Then they will go and be adopted for consultation with the as supporting documentation to the consultation document.
Thank you. Thanks, Tim. Councillor Warsnop, you've moved the paper, but you also have a comment.
Yep.
Or a question.
The targets, in lots and lots of cases, our target is lower than what we're currently achieving. And I think no, it's not really a win. It means we have no aspiration to do any better. I would kind of hope that if we're already nailing something, that we're reaching for the next step of excellence. Or if we're not, just as an example, I think our expectation of people, hang on, I've got one of the examples highlighted here. Where is it? Let's just pick on, I don't know, work plans monitored, farm environment plans. If we do it is on page 167 of the report. If we do 40 a year, we are going to be, we're going to have like 3/4 of people who are supposed to have them non-compliant with our freshwater plan. So, we can't actually afford to have 40 a year. You need a giant lump of 300 to have in 1 year. And I think in dog control, we expect 55% of people to be happy. It seems like we could really aim quite a bit higher. What's the justification behind the targets that we do have?
Well, there's a few things in relation to that. One is that you may find, because the way that this is set out, what you usually do, what's expected is you provide the previous year's result, doesn't necessarily track over a number of years. And sometimes you might find a specific example that last year may have been an anomalous year where it was higher than what we'd normally go. The other thing is it does have to match to the levels of service that you wish to provide in the budget that you put alongside that. So in some cases, there's a lot of managers who are very keen to try and stretch their targets as much as possible. But in other places, if the budget isn't increasing, sometimes it can be creating a rod for your own back to expect that you will lift without any additional resources being applied to that. So it sort of does depend. There are certainly some areas where there's quite a lot of stretch where we expect to see improvements. In other areas, it's a tacit acknowledgement that
we don't have additional funding or additional resources to achieve more than we're already achieving.
Thank you. Any other questions in regards to this? Councillor Seymour.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just, it's page 138, and I just wonder whether it's the box has got lost. We're talking about monitoring and enforcement, or enforcement and compliance is actually the heading 2 pages previous. So we're talking about commercial operations at the top of the page, then we're talking about the port and harbour safety code in the middle of the page. And then we go to performance measures on the port and harbour, then significant negative effects. And then we've got connected and safe communities and dog and animal control to protect the community's safety. And the next bit straight out says we control the CBD, contribute to a safe community, building and maintaining relationship with the community. So I think we might have lost a box or jumped somewhere.
Yeah,
It's the very bottom, it's actually the very bottom community outcome and contribution that on 138 doesn't seem to make sense.
Yeah, I suppose you're quite right. What the enforcement and compliance is the entirety of the activity. Then there are levels of service in that broader enforcement and compliance area, and those relate to different areas such as animal control and then port. Whereas the community outcomes that you report on speak to the entirety of the activity.
But I think it could be made more clear if you're going to provide it to the community.
Sure, that's noted. I think.
Councillor Foster.
Page 135, I'm talking about a vibrant city and townships and the encouragement of alternative uses of commercial buildings in the CBD to help regenerate, and including development of upper floors into apartments. Now, I think part of that could have been in the growth part of the facility strategy as well, because that is an obvious area of growth for housing, alternative housing for the future. But at the moment, we've got a lot of 5-story buildings empty. So how do we encourage these owners that there is a huge demand to convert them, and I don't know who pays? It's a huge cost whether they demolish and rebuild or can redesign. But yeah, there's huge opportunities in our CBD for inner city living, and I think we need to be utilising that and promoting it as much as we possibly can through our infrastructure strategy and through here. Obviously, it's mentioned quite a few times, but yeah, the question is how, there's some building banking going on. How do we stop this, and how do we, make sure that there's opportunities for growth in our city and expansion and apartments to be built? Well, there's a few going on at the moment, but there's certainly huge opportunities to do a lot more.
Thank you for that. There was a lot of, it's more a comment than a question, I assume.
Well, the question is, how do we encourage these building owners, some of them are overseas, to, and possibly to let them know that the opportunities are there if the premises are done, I mean.
Well, there's a lot happening. I visited Robbie McCann's beautiful development on top of the Heartland Bank. Yeah. So there are developers already doing that.
There's some huge opportunities, some huge buildings that have been empty for a long time that are, that are becoming eyesores, and need some encouragement for their owners to do something with them. I don't know how we do that. but you're saying in here, you're saying encourage. Well, how do you encourage? That was my question. What how are you going to do it?
I actually,
135. Encouraging alternative uses of
right, yes, yeah.
CBD to help reinvigorate the town centre and to stimulate ideas for the future that contribute to the economic health of the community. This includes development of upper floors and apartments.
Or maybe encourage the way we do, networking, talking to people. It's not really, doesn't sit within a council function as such.
Unfortunately, that's one that I probably have to pass across to, this comes in Helen Montgomery's area. I wouldn't be able to.
I think I made through your worship, so that you're referring to the community outcome that that activity contributes to. So when we look at what the building consents activity does overall, and it's linked back into the unitary plan or rules, what that does is encourages where you should undertake its activities. So loosely associated, that is an outcome that it contributes to. And that's kind of how we've flowed through some of the other activities around how do you contribute to the outcome of a vibrant tairāwhiti. So activity managers think about the purpose of their activity and therefore how they feel it contributes to that activity. So it's not an action orientated.
Councillor Faulkner.
I don't think you've got a seconder yet, so I'm happy to second
Thank you.
Kerry's movement. But I'm starting to feel like Uncle Bill. I've only been here for a year and I'm always talking about the same things. In your solid waste plans is, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I know we talk about rural and urban curbside collections. It's rural townships. Rural transfer operations, we don't have them. They don't exist in our rural areas. They're in our townships. So.
What
yeah.
page are you referring to?
Oh, sorry, page 150.
150.
And with that said, I would like to see within our plans for the next 10 years, some initiatives around supporting recycling in our rural community, not the rural townships, rural community, farming and forestry communities.
Thank you for that. Okay, any more questions from councillors? Councillor Cranston.
Page 150. We did have a big presentation just a couple of years ago now on the wheelie bins, and I'm just not sure how solid our intent is to go down that path. I know it's going to cost quite a few dollars. So in one bullet point, we've got continue the rollout of new litter bins. So I'm not sure whether that was anything to do with wheelie bins, but down a couple of bullet points after that, we've got engaged professional services to undertake a region-wide public engagement process to gauge the appetite to change to wheelie bins. So is that a pretty solid intention, or where are we going with that?
Mr. Wilson.
So through the chair, the litter bins are for the curbside bins that we have at the moment. So our public rubbish bins effectively. So we have a budget to set aside to roll out, to change out, because we have from a 40-gallon drum on the side of the road right through to our compaction bins at the moment. So we're trying to upgrade the litter bins. So that's what the first bullet point's talking to. The second bullet point refers to, we need to understand the implications for moving to a different collection system and different wheelie bins, for example, at people's houses. So if we would go to, say, the much touted Auckland scheme where they have their 3 wheelie bin collection system, so solid waste and then plastic and then glass. If we were going to go to a 3-bin system, we actually have to work through the cost implications. That all aligns with the collection contract that we're talking about. So what we're doing is getting professional services in to look at the cost implications, the business case before we tender that waste contract. So that's what we're talking about, is bringing, because it will come with a cost increase compared to what the system is that we're doing now, from the purchase of the bins right through to the collection model that would need to change as well. So we're bringing in somebody to help us with that, because that'll inform that decision when we go out for that waste contract.
I do note in the satisfaction survey, it said 100% of people are happy with the bins at the moment, but I'd like to add to that that there's a very strong percentage that aren't happy with them on windy days when the town turns into a litter trashed area. So I just don't think the current system is that good.
Thank you for that.
Can I just ask a supplementary about that?
Go. Yes, please.
Can I ask Mr. Wilson if we're looking at small provincial accounts, not just what Auckland do?
Sorry, through the chair, that was just an example. We're looking at a whole range of different collection systems and what works across the country.
Thank you. Okay, councillors. I have a mover in Councillor Worsnop, a seconder in Councillor Faulkner. All in favour, contrary, carried. Thank you, Tim. So our last document for today, so just we'll finish shortly, but then we'll have a discussion. I've got lots of things that I want to update you on after I've closed the meeting. Financial strategy, we are on page 193. Thank you, Pauline. Thanks, Terina. interesting and easy to read document. Thank you. Do you want to introduce the paper and then I'll open it?
Oh, kia ora koutou and a belated happy Lunar New Year. I won't be momo timer with my introduction. I think it's pretty clear in the report that Council must, as part of our long-term plan, draft and adopt a financial strategy. Unlike the infrastructure strategy, it has a 10-year scope, and this report is not for information, it's for decision, and it seeks your consideration of and approval of the draft strategy for consultation with our community come March.
Thank you, Pauline.
I'll just add a couple of things. It is part of the process that also goes through audit, and they will look at it. And when they look at adopting our CD consultation document, they look at the supporting arms that come with it, which is the financial strategy and the infrastructure strategy. And so they need to all talk to one another. And so if they feel there in some parts need to have more information about some of the things, that will be where we may have a little bit of addressing into the financial strategy. So just aware that it is as complete as we have before we get to your changes or anything that might come back from the auditors.
Thank you. I'm going to open the floor. Councillors, any questions? We've seen most of this before. Yes, so you've just put it together in one strategy. So any questions? If not, is there someone willing to move the paper? Councillor Bedette, seconded by Councillor MAB. All in favour, contrary, carried. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Why are you voting against it? Please note, Councillor Seymour voted against it. I declare our meeting closed. Thank you, Pauline. Thank you,